Good morning and welcome to the most recent edition of What's Working. This is a session, a podcast where we talk to somebody that is in the church, whether a preacher or otherwise, that has expertise or experience in a certain area that is also hopefully using that experience and expertise to help drive the gospel. That's what we're all about. And so we've spent the last couple of weeks interviewing people from different churches and talking about Facebook Live, talking about how to use Zoom and Meetup for small groups and things like that. And we're actually excited to have another guy on the podcast today, Daniel Lee, who is a preacher and also somebody who has professional experience in what we're talking about. We're going to be talking about the concept of design today as we talk about how churches can use design in their meeting flyers and social media images, things like that. All about how you present yourself to people and to congregations or to people who may be visiting your congregation. That's what we're all about here. We want to make sure that we use the resources and tools we have available to us to help spread the gospel. That's what we care about. That's what this podcast is about. I know Daniel is at least a little bit interested in that. I don't know, maybe a passing interest. Daniel, what do you think about that?
Stupidly optimistic and overly excited is probably the way I would describe myself.
That's a very politically correct / also appropriate answer, I think.
Yeah.
As we mentioned, Daniel is a preacher. You're a preacher in Granbury. You've been there for how long? A couple years now, or?
Yeah, I started preaching full time in 2016 with this church. We actually moved here in 2013. Mm-hmm. When we moved here, I wasn't preaching at all. In fact, I was working as a marketing manager in the secular world, and then my role kind of transitioned. I organically grew into this role where I was preaching full time, and so since 2016, been working with this church.
Okay, and I wasn't sure. You said you were full time now, or are you still?
I am full time. Yes.
Okay. I know, like most preachers, you probably have like 12 side gigs on the side, and I know design is one of them. But it's preaching. If you're blessed enough to have a full-time preaching work, that's awesome. And your church especially has had a lot of growth. I remember talking to you a couple years ago, and it was relatively new work, and Granbury. For those who are watching this from not in Texas, Granbury is a suburb of Fort Worth, and so you're kind of on the. You're not, when I think of suburbs of Fort Worth, I think something like, on just right on the cusp, somewhere up lying like Flower Mound or Louisville area, but you're kind of even farther out. You're south, but you're kind of even farther out than the Metroplex. And so it's interesting when you talk about people that have come into a relatively new work in a mostly rural area and have experienced quite a bit of growth. Speak to that. What would you think has probably been the biggest motivator, the biggest help in your local work and evangelizing your local community? Has it been social media? Is it just door knocking? Because I know there's lots of people that are probably in similar positions to you.
Yeah, I'll tell you, for us, a lot of it's just organic growth, because we're in a community right now that the Metroplex is growing towards, and so we've had a lot of people move out this direction. We've used social media really as our primary source, Facebook. We're just now starting to engage that, but our website really has been our major point of contact for the past several years. We're recently, and by recently I mean in the past 6 to 9 months, we've started really upping our digital game and using our website as a tool and a resource for people. And we've got plans to increase that in the future. But really our website and our Google ad spend, getting on there and just making sure we are accessible and easy to find for people.
That Google ad, I think we talked about with Kyle a few weeks ago about the necessity of having some kind of digital footprint. That's that first point of contact that people are going to have whenever they hear who you are. You don't hear about too many people using Google ads. I know there's a Google grant that they give to churches. There's a lot of stipulations. We don't have necessarily the time to go into that right now, and that's not really what I wanted to pick your brain about. But Google Ads is a really efficient local marketing tool. We use Facebook ads here at Hillside. I know a lot of churches use Facebook ads, and we use that. But that more kind of has a global impact as well as local. But Google Ads especially can be super powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I know that you have, I know we were talking about before we hopped on, you have a website that you actually run with your sister, a social media account, and also a website you run with your sister. I think on Facebook, it's Change Your Mind. Is it Change Your Mind Today or just Change Your Mind?
Change Your Mind Today. Yes. Okay.
We don't want to talk about Change Your Mind. That probably goes somewhere you don't want to go to. But Change Your Mind Today.
That was the one that I wanted.
Okay.
They didn't give me that, so I got Change Your Mind Today. But I think it's a great message.
Yeah.
I'll give you a little context. The reason I named it that is there's a song by my favorite band called from Sister Hazel.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite band.
Yeah.
And they have a song called Change Your Mind. And that song has been really pivotal in my life in terms of encouraging me to think differently. And there's a line in the song that says, if you want to be somebody else, change your mind. And I think that's an incredibly biblical topic. In fact, I think about Romans chapter 12, don't be conformed, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Right.
And so that's something that really prompted us starting this website and the social media page, because really being a disciple of Jesus is all about making a choice to have a different mindset, having the mind of Christ, Philippians 2 would say. And so we started this project just as a way of offering people material to help them think differently. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not really any different than what we do in our churches and in our ministries, but it's just I wanted to offer another resource that maybe wasn't directly coming from a church's website.
Yeah, I think that's super valuable. And I think you see that a lot happening with people right now who are using social media in a non-corporate formal worship context, where they, maybe have videos that content that you necessarily wouldn't see in a church. It's not that it's inappropriate. It's just not maybe the right format for stuff like that. And I know y'all do a lot of short form videos. I've listened to several of them that are on your Facebook page, and they're always concise, but super value driven. And that's what I like. There's a lot of content in there. So they're very encouraging, and I think y'all are doing a good job. So if you're listening to this and you're looking for something else to add to your repertoire of listening kind of options, I would definitely encourage you. Change your mind today, not change your mind. Once again, we don't know who those people are. We don't want to plug them. They're not a part of this. Change your mind today. Go there and check that out. But you have, as you mentioned, you worked in the secular world before you started preaching full time. And so you have a lot of experience. You mentioned as a marketing coordinator, which is where we are kindred spirits. Me and you kind of speak a very similar language. I know you have a couple other guys at the church there that kind of work with that too. So you've got a good set of resources there at Granbury that help you with marketing. But I know your expertise is in design, and I'll be honest with you, and I don't mind admitting this to everybody that's watching this from now until forever. I am the absolute worst designer when it comes down to it. My wife still picks out my clothes for Sunday morning. She lays out my t-shirts. I don't have that eye. And obviously, web development is kind of a different beast, but I've had to manually pick up those things along the way and learn what works. And I think if anything, I should be an encouragement to the rest of us who maybe weren't, blessed with the gift of design, because that is obviously one of the spiritual gifts, 1 Corinthians 12, the gift of design. By the way, if you can't tell my sarcasm, hopefully it came through right there. But those of us who don't have a design eye, I think can still learn it and still pick up some of those kind of basics. And I think in churches today, that's really valuable because the way that we present ourselves to other people matters a lot. I know that that's something that me and you have talked about extensively, and it's something we're both pretty passionate about.
Yeah, well, and let me just say this, Brady. Typically, when we use the word design to people who are not designers, I think it immediately conjures up these ideas of neat graphics and or creating some sort of next level experience. But for the sake of our conversation, and really for the sake of how we integrate this into our gospel work, design is really all about connecting with people. It's about understanding how to package our information, whether it's our visuals or what we have written, a blog, even our website or social media page, organizing it in a way that makes sense to our end users and is accessible and easy to navigate. Because I think, you can have the best content out there, but if I'm on your site or if I'm on your social media page and I'm trying to read it or understand it, and it's jumbled up or it's organized strangely or the colors are weird, that's really going to detract from my experience in engaging what you're trying to offer to me. And as pertains to our gospel work, I mean, that's the greatest thing we want to avoid is any sort of barrier to our message. We want to create something that is easy and accessible.
Right. And I think that's probably the most important point to bring up, because I'm reminded when you said that, I remember I had a friend in college who majored in interior design, and I made the grave mistake one time of saying, "Oh, you know where to hang pictures." And it was a total joke. But if I'm being honest, that was my understanding of it. And she just lit into me. She told me, it's not that. It's about the functionality. It's how rooms go together, how you flow. And I think that's important. And you mentioned the technical aspects of it. And that's something we don't talk about. When we look at websites, when we look at advertisements, and you look at even books to a certain extent, the design of that impacts the readability and the accessibility of something like that. And we try to incorporate that in all of our websites because, we talk about it in terms of user experience. What is the user experience of somebody who's visiting for the first time, maybe who's visiting for a specific purpose? What's the path of somebody as they go through your site? And a lot of websites don't have it. And, even some of the ones that I've built haven't had it. And it's something you have to intentionally do. But if you've got two people, that are looking at your site and one which that's designed appropriately, one that's not, you'll notice an attrition rate. And I know that's kind of the way that you view design and more of a functional aspect.
That's right. Yeah. Design always, and part of this is my personality. I believe that design always needs to be functional first. Whenever I was in art school, they used to talk about how there's these two different trains of thought. Some artists look at it from the aspect of just engagement and how it makes you feel, how someone responds to it, and others look at it from the perspective of how this is going to function in my life. And I think somewhere in the middle is where we need to find ourselves, because obviously you don't want just a plain black and white site that's boring. You need some sort of engagement, but at the same time, it has to be something that makes sense to people. And one of the most, we've talked about this before, one of the most frustrating things to me as I look at a lot of websites in our brethren, in our fellowship, the websites, there's tons of good information out there, but it's not presented, or it's not organized in a way that makes sense when people get on the site. I'll give you a perfect example. I go to different churches' websites to try to find, to listen to sermons, right? And I would guess a lot of people do that. They're going and they're looking for good Bible teaching, but on some websites, it's buried somewhere like 3 or 4 pages deep. You got to click 3 or 4 times, and it doesn't always make sense how to get there. And you really have to be looking for it. And while that may not be overly complicated and overly difficult, wouldn't it make more sense if you knew people were coming to your website looking for sermons to have a big button on the front that says, click here for sermons, And so it really, design requires some forethought. And really it requires us to put ourselves in the shoes of the people that are going to be using the resources we're offering to them, because it's not enough just to say, we put our content out there and it's your job to figure out how to use it. We've got to walk through, and that's part of what marketing and design is all about, is saying, okay, who are my users and what are they looking for and how are we going to give this to them?
That's I was talking to somebody the other day at a congregation, and great guy, great congregation. I think it's probably in, the mid hundreds. And so they've got good resources. They've got lots of good content, and they put a lot of emphasis into their live stream service. And of course, right now this will drop, or people will be watching this a few weeks from now. But as we record this, we're recording this knee deep in the middle of a coronavirus, pandemic. And so people are trying to figure out how to live stream their services, and people that didn't see the use of it 6 months ago are absolutely seeing the use of it now. And I was talking to them about their website, and I was on the phone with them as I was going through it, and I couldn't find their live stream. And this was something they were investing, I think $30 or $40 a month. They're using restream.io, which is a fantastic service for live streaming, and it has a lot of capabilities. But I couldn't find it on their site. And it was, their sermon tab was right here. Then they had buried on a secondary tab of their resources page, it had a live stream button. And then you had to go to the live stream button, and then they didn't have a library open, so you couldn't just browse. And I just told them this. I said, this is an issue because, number one, your content is not accessible, and number two, it's not accessible by people who just happen upon it. And that's really, part of our push at Diakonos is exactly what you said. There's so much fantastic content, and you read it, I read it, but most of the world doesn't. You should not have to, when you Google, what do I need to do to be saved, or how do I get to heaven, or some kind of relevant search term, you shouldn't be on page 10 before you see an article by one of our brethren. And design plays into that. If people can't access the resources on your website intuitively, then they're not going to access it. And I think we give people too much credit to say, oh, well, they'll find it eventually. Well, people aren't. I mean, if you put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's visiting your site for the first time, would you? And I think that's a good way to kind of look at it.
Yeah, that's a
yeah. I know that you do a lot of social, or you do a lot of graphic work in a lot of different areas, because we've been friends for a while. It doesn't feel like we've been friends for a while. I think it's been probably 12 years at this point. But which makes me just feel old. That wasn't like me groaning about how long I've known you, but
we are so old.
I know. I'm gonna be 34 in August. Oh, might as well just go ahead and order my gravestone. Once again, hence the sarcasm. But no, I've seen your work. I've seen what you've done for a long time, and I know you do a lot of work in a bunch of different areas. And I know that you also one of your side gigs is you help churches with their design work. I know you have done work for several clients, people that our listeners would know, maybe not recognize that you're kind of the force behind it. But what I wanted to ask you is, how does design change when you're moving from platform to platform? Because design is one way, and we've talked about it primarily in terms of website with user experience and how it goes from place to place. How does does design and a functional and an aesthetic qualities, does it change when you move from website to social media to print handouts? Does it change to branding? Does it change, or are there some concepts that are similar amongst all of those?
That's a really great question. And it
Thank
touches
you. I just thought of it.
You're welcome. Yeah. You're brilliant, Brady.
Yeah, thank you.
This touches on something that I feel very strongly about, that I think we neglect in a lot of our presentation, and it is this idea of consistency.
Right.
If somebody comes to my social media page and they see our logo and it looks a certain way, and I've used specific colors, and then if they go to my website and they see that logo or a different logo with different fonts and different colors, there's going to be some cognitive dissonance for that person, because they're going to think, wait, am I in the same place? Is this the same? Did I mean to come here? Am I in the right spot? I'll give you a perfect example. So the other day I got an email from Wells Fargo, and it was an email that said, we suspect that there might be some fraud on your account. We saw these charges, and we're not sure if it's really you. We need you to contact us. And there's a contact number at the bottom, which, no big deal, right? That I'm glad that they reached out to me. But what caused me pause was at the top of that email was their logo. And you guys may not realize this. I'm a design guy, and so I latch onto these things. But they've just recently redesigned their logo, and the logo that was in the email was the old logo. And so I'm looking at that and I'm saying, well, is this a scam email? Is this actually Wells Fargo? Do I need to call it? Because I don't want to call that number and give them information and it be a scam and me get taken, right? But you see what I'm saying? It all boils down to this idea of design. There was inconsistency in their design, a little nuance, but in my mind, it created enough doubt that I was not sure if I was actually talking to Wells Fargo. And so what you bring up is, between our different platforms, whether it's Instagrams, any social media, Facebook, our website, Vimeo, YouTube, whatever we use, there needs to be consistency in how we present ourselves. And that includes fonts, that includes logos, that includes graphics. And so if somebody gets on they connect with you on your Facebook page, for example, you need to send them to your website that looks a lot like what you're giving them on your social media page. And usually the way that I do that is I'll take one strong graphic and I will connect that graphic to my website so that people know. And so in terms of design, I think it's important to be consistent across platforms. Now, having said that, that's going to take on different applications. I believe on social media, you have a much more limited space to offer information, because typically people are not looking for exhaustive information. You think about, that's the whole reason Twitter got started, 140 characters, because they want to give you a limited amount of space. Same thing about Facebook. You can give a little bit more information, but that's not really a platform to offer, hey, let me give you an exposition on, the book of Jude or something like that. It doesn't make sense.
Some people do have an exposition on the book of Jude on their Facebook pages, though.
Some people do that. Yeah, it's not wise. But whereas on your website, there's more of a space to do that. And so those are some considerations that you need to offer when trying to get people to plug into your information and to your gospel message is, am I designing or laying out or presenting the information in a way that's appropriate to the audience? So, for example, on Facebook, in my experience, people are more likely to click on a link that will redirect them to a blog rather than read a blog post that's this long, right? And see, that comes down to an issue of design. Design meaning I have designed this big long paragraph, which nobody's going to read, versus I've designed a little hook that asks maybe a leading question and prompts somebody to click that link and move forward. And so you get into a little bit of strategy when it comes to design as well.
Yeah.
But you asked me about, design on the different platforms. And I just think we have to be mindful and thoughtful of what our users are willing and wanting to engage with on the different platforms. I think our websites are more appropriate for giving people more long form information, longer videos. Somebody's going to go watch a 30-minute video or listen to a 30-minute sermon on a website, as opposed to Facebook, where they're looking more for the 5 to 10-minute videos.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to, I think you're exactly right when you say about, you have to be intentional with your platforms. I've seen churches that have put their entire sermon videos. As a matter of fact, at Hillside, we do that. We have our entire sermon video on there. We're actually in the process right now, though, of trying to create more short form snippets out of those videos. And we did, our virtual Bible summit. It's been probably about a month or 2 months by the time this airs. And, we had these long form contents. That's not really what Facebook is for. It's good in that it hosts videos like that in terms of a social network. But, YouTube's probably more appropriate, or Vimeo maybe even more appropriate as just a hosting provider for it. But it does allow that exchange. But when you talk about being intentional, you're exactly right. For the platform that you're dealing with, you have to think about what is the audience for this platform? How can it work with the other assets that we have? I think your point about linking to your website, I think, is great, because a lot of people don't think about, we think about these platforms working independently of each other, when in reality that consistency between them brings trust. And I think that's exactly what you were talking about a second ago.
Yeah. Well, and this all points back to, you got to know your audience, because to your point, I mean, you guys post your full length sermons on there because maybe you have an audience for that. And if you have an audience on Facebook that's willing to engage a 30-minute video, then do it. But if they're not, you need to know whether or not that's actually what's going on.
Yeah, I guess I should clarify that. I guess the reason we have it is probably the reason a lot of churches right now have it, and that's because we're live streaming it on Sunday morning, or we're watching classes during the normal 7 o'clock Wednesday night or 9:30. But it does just stay up there. We do not produce content strictly for Facebook that's long form in nature, because that's just not what it's there for. And you're right. When you think about the average, video length of, an ad, for instance, is, 30 to 90 seconds. You have to think about, in terms of Facebook, people scrolling and people, what are they using it for? Instagram is different than Facebook, and TikTok is a whole other beast that we don't have time to get into right now. I'm sure you have a TikTok account. And you've been, doing all the dance challenges.
I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, I hope. Yeah. Can we do another podcast at some point in the future where all we do is talk about Daniel Lee's TikTok videos? I think that'd be awesome.
Don't go find me, please.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, Kelsey, I'm sure, would have a couple objections about that.
Yeah. Something I'd like to interject in this conversation, as it pertains to design, we really need to think about how users interact with digital content these days, because you mentioned shorter attention spans and the scrolling effect, and how people, if it doesn't hook their attention at first, we lose. I think some studies say you lose, 85 to 90% of people if you can't hook them within the first 10 to 15 seconds. And so, you just think about what you're offering people, because I think our challenge in presenting the gospel is we feel like we have such an important message to give people that we just want to dump it on them sometimes. And that's like, spraying your kid down with a fire hose. It doesn't make any sense. And it hurts and it's overwhelming. We need to just give people a little bit of a taste, give them a reason to draw in and to engage with us. And that again points back to how we design it. Are we giving them something that is digestible and encourages them? Because the reality is, if I get on Facebook, I'm probably not looking to be engaged with this heavy amount of information all at once. Now, maybe I am, but we need to craft our information so that it encourages people who want more to come look for more. It's kind of the well, that's the way billboards work. If you're driving down the road, most billboards don't have a full story on them because you don't have time, to tell a full story. They have at most 12 to 15 words, because as you're driving by, that's all people can process. And it's the same way with digital things. People are moving so quickly through digital information. We've got to give them something quickly, some sort of hook and reason to dig a little bit deeper. And for the people that are looking for it, they'll certainly come look for it. But designing either whether it's graphics or whether it's our words or our content in such a way to hook people is really where we need to put our focus when it comes to the gospel message.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. You know, it's you mentioned earlier about drinking from a fire hose, and I like how you mentioned, especially it hurts, because it really does hurt. You know, and we have sometimes, we've mentioned this in another podcast, we have sometimes this almost Calvinistic mindset towards the way that we transfer information to other people, which is, you know, I'm just going to throw the information out there, and then those who are chosen shall then receive the information. and that's not the way it is. You know, if I dump an entire exposition of Jude on my Facebook page, well, naturally, the people that are the holy ones are going to read that, and everybody else, well, they just don't love God. And I think that is dishonest. I think that is, I think that's insulting, because, like you mentioned, people consume information in a variety of different ways. And you referenced, or I think you referenced, or maybe I was thinking that you should have referenced it, but I was thinking about when Paul mentions in Corinthians, you know, to the Jew I became as a Jew. The way that we bring information to people needs to be adaptable to their circumstances, and the same applies for design. You know, I want to talk to you specifically about this because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a design noob, and I see all these people out there, and we've done it at Hillside, that put together, and for some reason, the example that's just screaming to me right now is gospel meeting flyers. And we have, you know, an 8.5 by 11 meeting flyer that we hand out to other people. And we just want to jam all the information that we possibly can on that flyer. And we don't care if it's size 7 font. We don't care if we use Comic Sans, because we just want to put that flyer in. I know. What? Comic Sans is useful if you're writing a comic book. I mean, come on.
Or if you teach
but we want to just dump as much information on that as possible. And I know that you've talked to me in the past about the necessity of less is more. And you mentioned that with billboards, and that's, I think, where you were going with that too. If I'm designing, a gospel meeting flyer, we'll just use that for example. If I'm designing a gospel meeting flyer for my church, what types of information do you think needs to be on there? And then what types of information do you think I can leave off? Because that's the functional aspect of design.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that's a great question. And I think we need to put ourselves on the other side of that flyer. Mm-hmm. And think, you know, if I'm reading a church's, what information are you looking for? And I think we quickly understand what we're looking for. We need to know when it's going to happen. I mean, obviously the dates need to be there. I think the title of the series is super important. Now, I realize not everybody has a good, strong title, but I think that coming up with a good series title is critically important. Mm-hmm. Having the speaker name, I think, is not critically important, but it's significant to some people, especially if you have somebody of importance. And then knowing how to get more information.
As somebody like me, you don't need my name on a flyer. I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out there. But if you have somebody of importance, you can put their name on the flyer. No, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Well, and I'll tell you, the way that we've migrated towards, we've actually moved away from meeting flyers just because for the reason you're talking about, there's so much information that can be put on one. And really the goal is just to let people know, hey, we're getting together and we're meeting to talk about this specific topic. Yeah. Here's when we're meeting, times and dates, and here's how to contact us. And what we found is most people will reach out to us, or they will come to our website looking for more information. So what we've migrated towards is doing more of like a social media type post where it says, here's the title, here's the person, here's the dates, click here for more information. And again, that points people to your website where they can find information about where to find you, how to get there. You can list all the nightly or daily topics that are going to be discussed. You can dump as much information, because if somebody gets to that point, then they're actually looking for that information, right? Yeah. And so for me, gospel meeting flyers, they're just a mess sometimes, because we're trying to just saturate people with so much, and they just need to know when do I need to be there,
and why do I need to be there? Yeah.
Why do I need to be there?
And I think we've probably all committed the cardinal sin of creating a gospel meeting flyer and then using that as an image on social media, which is terrible because you cannot see the print, especially if you're on your phone. Right. But you're right. I can see that. And, even I was thinking back to our gospel meetings that we've had where we always have somebody of importance when we have our gospel meetings, every person that comes through. But, we'll print off a stack of flyers, maybe, 200, 300 thick because we're trying to think of, everybody handing out 2 or 3. And it never fails. Every single gospel meeting we've had for the last several years, there's always, a third to a half that are left. And I think that speaks to your point about how that's not necessarily maybe how we announce things like that anymore. We hand them a flyer, whereas now people read about it on Facebook. If you post it up at work, you may hand it to your neighbor, but we just don't communicate information that way. And so I think you're right. Keeping that design minimal on whatever the initial announcement is, and then funneling it out to other points, I think that's really important. I think that's super valuable.
That's an excellent point. And I think just considering how we communicate with each other these days, we need to communicate the gospel in the same ways. We started creating little images to send to our people so they can text it to others. And those kinds of things make sense to people because they'll get it in a text, they'll look at it, and they can save it for later. They can send it in an email, they can post it on social media. And so we try to design our assets for gospel meetings with those things in mind. Right.
I think that's really important. We talked about at the beginning, I don't want to keep you too long. We're having a good conversation. I feel like we're kind of running up against the end of our allotted time, but I want to ask you real quick because I know there's lots of people that are listening to this and thinking, okay, I need to be intentional with my design. I need to keep it minimal, less is more, kind of lead people down a path instead of just shotgun blasting in information, people in one shot. Let's say that I'm a preacher, local congregation. I'm looking at my website, looking at my social media. What are some general principles? We've talked about less is more and intentional, those kind of ideas. But I want to think, what are some general principles that I can use that will get me to an above average level of design, pretty quickly? Like what are the foundational principles that I need to understand as I move forward, whether I'm looking at website or social media, whatever it is? What are those really things I really need to hone in on? That kind of that 80-20 rule where, you get 80% of your benefit from 20% of your effort. What's that 20% that I really need to focus on, in your opinion? And maybe it is brevity. I don't know.
Yeah, I do think less is more is just my mantra. I live my life by that because I think that's what the wise man in Proverbs say, right? When transgression is not lacking. So try to keep things short and to the point. I think a principle that I try to really promote with people in this conversation is being intentional about prioritizing your information and positioning your information. So there's 2 P's for you: priority and positioning. And what I mean by that is making sure that the message you want communicated is in a place that makes sense to people and that they're going to find it easily. So if I come to your website and you're thinking in your mind, I want people to be able to find my live stream easily, you need to go to your website and think about what is the most prominent place for that. Yeah. It's not going to be somewhere where you have to scroll to get to. It's not going to be buried in there. It's going to be right there prominent where someone can click right on it. Yeah. And, we just don't think about that sometimes. We've got all of our little tabs up at the top, and it's in there, but it's not somewhere where it's just hitting me in the face. And so thinking about where I'm positioning the most important information is so critical. That's why, so if you go to our website, for example, we have tabs up at the top that we feel like meet the needs of the people that are coming to our site. We have a little tab called Bible Study Help because we've determined that if people come to our site that are looking for the truth, they're probably looking for Bible study help, and they can drop that down and find the options that they're looking for. And then we have another tab that says Bible teaching because we know people are coming looking for sermons or they're looking for blogs. And so it's easily accessible, and it's in language that makes sense to them. Yeah. And so because we've identified those 2 things and they are our priority, we've positioned them so that whenever anyone comes to our site, they're not searching for it forever. They can get where they need to be in 1 to 2 clicks. And that is so important when it comes to design of websites. If research shows, if people can't find what they're looking for in 1 to 2 clicks, you're going to lose at least half of your people.
Yeah.
At least half of them.
Yeah.
They'll be frustrated, or they'll just say, maybe this isn't actually where I want to be. I mean, we've all been that person, right? I was on, I'll give you an example of me. I was on social media the other day. I was looking for some pages that offer motivational and biblical images, just things that have little Bible verses and stuff like that. And so I'd go to these different social media pages, and I'd scroll through, their first 5 or 6 posts. And if I didn't find what I was looking for in the first, couple scrolls, I was like, no, that's not it. And they might have had good content. They might have had something else, but it wasn't what I was looking for. Yeah. And so I was like, I'm out. And, and we just need to put ourselves, I think this points back to, you really have to have that conversation in your churches with, who are the people we're trying to reach? What do they look like? Right. And what are they looking for? Yeah. And if we're going to give them those things, we need to think about where it needs to go. And so we've broken it down that way at our church.
I think that's important. There's a concept, and I know you know this, but the concept of a customer avatar. Who are you trying to reach? What is your ideal person? And whether you're talking about when you're talking about websites, social media, or even your meeting file, or whatever type of graphic you're trying to create, you have to put yourself, and not just put yourself in their shoes, but also think, what type of person is this? Is this somebody who is rural? Is it urban? Is it somebody who, are they male or female? Are they somebody who is, friendly towards the gospel, or maybe am I doing an apologetics, maybe studies, so we're targeting atheists? What is the attitude of this person? And I think you hit on it exactly when you said that the design functions into that, or kind of bleeds into who that person is. So I think that's an important point. Being purposeful, I see it all the time when I talk to churches about their websites and about their social media, and this is not a slam on them. And I think it's literally just a product of our rapidly developing times technologically. Sure. Websites and social media are almost often considered an afterthought, where it's, we put a lot of emphasis on the building. We make sure our sign looks good, our carpets are clean, but then the website is secondary. And we forget about the fact that that is the number one way that people find out about who we are. And I think having, even having a meeting or having 10 minutes where you think, okay, what assets do we have and how can we prioritize that? Which I love that, prioritizing and positioning. How can we position our our priorities on our website, on our social media? We change, it's a really silly example. We change our button link on our Facebook page. We change it all the time, depending on what type of our objective we may have. Sometimes we're trying to get people on a mailing list. Sometimes we're pointing people to a landing page about our gospel meeting. Sometimes we're pointing people to our group. It changes depending on what our needs are. And it comes because of awareness. And I think you nailed it right on with that point. This has been a good conversation. I've really enjoyed this. And I want to have you, as I mentioned before we started, I want to have you on at least another 150 times before July, just so we can dive more into this, because there's so much about design, and I'm just scratching the surface of my own kind of little world about it. But I know that this is a world that you live in. I know it's a world that you love. You hold near and dear to your heart. I think I see a picture of it actually behind you. It's something you're very, very passionate about. So I want to say, first of all, I want to say thank you for spending time with us. I know you're a busy person right now with COVID going on, but I also want to give you the last word. If there's anything that you can think of, one kind of message, one kind of thing you want to tell people before we close out this session, I want you to have the last word. So go ahead.
Sure. I appreciate that. The gospel is the most important message in the world, telling people about Jesus and connecting people with Jesus. And all the passion you hear from me and that you hear from Brady, it's about doing that as best that we can. God has called us to excel in what we do. And I'm not calling us to become professionals by any stretch of the imagination, but I am calling us to do the best that we can, because we want people to know about Jesus. And so let's give intentional thought to what we're doing and how we are presenting ourselves. And let's not just be haphazard with it. It may not be something we fully understand or appreciate right now, but it's something that we can learn and we can do better in. I mean, Brady and I, before we had this interview, we were talking about there's areas of technology that we're ignorant of, but we're trying to learn and grow. And I think that parallels well our life as a Christian. We're always trying to learn and to grow. And so let's evaluate the resources we have at our disposal, the people that we have at our disposal, and be intentional and thoughtful with it, because we do the best that we can. We know that we plant, we water, but God gives the increase. But he wants us to be vehicles for his message, to share this message of the gospel. And so let's just be the best vehicles that we possibly can as we work to serve our Lord and our King in this work here on this earth.
Amen to that. I appreciate it, man. Thank you for
Amen.
that. That's a great way to end it. I'll let you get back to your work. Thanks.